everyone, and thank you very much for joining me today. If we haven't met before, my name is Charlotte Fletcher. I am a sales engineer at Somerford Associates. And what I'm going to be looking at with you today are some basic fundamental ways in which you can protect your data with Varonis. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that the session will be recorded and the slides will be available after today. So what we're going to be looking at today, I'll start by letting you know who Somerford Associates are, for those of you who are not familiar. Then I'll give you a brief overview of the Varonis data security platform before we go into more detail about how to protect one of your most important assets, that being data. And I'll use four Varonis's use cases, if you like, and then give a brief overview of the environment itself, using an example of remediating one of the key vulnerabilities that quite often we find organizations come up against. And then finally, what I'll talk to you about is the data risk assessment, and we can leave some time at the end for questions and answers. So if you have any of those, please pop them in the chat window or in the question window, and I can have a look at those in a little while. Somerford Associates are a platinum partner with Varonis. Now, we're the go-to partner for expertise across some of the UK's largest companies, government agencies and departments. And our customer-focused consultants understand not only the business, but also information management challenges that organizations are faced with today. Our professional services team is comprehensively trained in every one of our solutions and works very closely with all of our customers to meet their specific requirements. We have a support desk in-house, and they are dedicated to resolving support cases without the need for escalating these to vendors. In fact, over 90%, 95% of support cases are resolved without the need for escalation. Varonis is one of our partners that we can work in conjunction with to offer a free data risk assessment. I will go over this in a lot more detail towards the end because it's definitely something we think is worthwhile taking advantage of. Very brief overview. So the Varonis data security platform provides a maturity journey that looks to detect the threats, prevent them, and then sustain a strong security posture within your environment. And the key points on the agenda at the beginning, so classification of data, overexposed data, remediation of that, and data owners. All of these are examples of ways that transfer to Varonis's detect, prevent, and sustain use cases. So how is it doing that? Well, firstly, it will look at all of the data stored in your enterprise data stores, as well as cloud stores, applications, and services. So looking at those on the left-hand side, they're most likely what you're familiar with and using on a daily basis. And the majority of what is stored in these, if it's enterprise data stores, cloud stores, is going to be unstructured data, and that's the data we know the least about. So essentially, it's what's in the dark. Now, some of you may be aware of Varonis's new acquisition of Polyrise, but for those of you who don't, this has meant that Varonis is now able to cover additional cloud applications, services, infrastructure. And the Polyrise platform maps and analyzes the relationships between users and application accounts inside and outside of the organization, and the relationship those accounts have to data and other resources across siloed cloud technologies. And it's also monitoring behavior and then alerting you when something goes wrong. So if that's something that sounds familiar, that's because this is what Varonis has been doing for those data stores on-premise and for Microsoft 365. So Varonis now has a unified data security platform to protect all of these data stores. So Varonis will go out to the on-prem and cloud data stores classify the content, identify and map all of the users and the associated security groups across all of these various directories. The access controls, permissions on data, and other resources are also mapped, so you can know exactly what data is exposed and to whom. And it will also monitor activity, including authentication telemetry, so data activity, authentications to all of these directory stores, and perimeter, so that you can see the movement from cloud to on-prem and vice versa. And crucially, we need to make sure that data and other resources are properly protected and that they're not overexposed or exposed inappropriately, so that we can measure risk and understand where to focus efforts to reduce it, prove compliance, and make sure that data is kept private. And of course, if the worst is to happen and you are a victim of a successful attack, you can be aware of it and quickly respond to it, meaning that the negative effects are mitigated. So what does the threat landscape look like at the moment? So one of the biggest threats posed to our data is the amount of increasingly successful cyber attacks. Now ask yourself this: how many times over the past year or so have you heard about organizations and departments being hit by ransomware? It truly has become a board level conversation because of the detrimental effects that so many of these attacks are have had across all sectors. So no one sector is immune. We all hold data, and that data is one of the most valuable assets that we have. And when a company or an organization is a victim of a cyber attack, what are the threats? So what are we faced against? Well, firstly, once the breach is detected, which can quite often be a lot further down the line from the attack itself, we've got to consider the investigation time required to look into what has happened. And this, of course, is then taking security teams away from other tasks. Then next, you'll need to think about the blast radius. So how much data has been accessed, how much has been encrypted, maybe exfiltrated. And again, all of this is taking up the time of those investigating and has costs associated with that time spent. And at some point, the attackers are likely to contact you and ask for a ransom sum. And scarily, a large portion of organizations ask for that sum actually pay it. But that doesn't always mean that you'll get all of the data back, or that there aren't copies out there having been sold on the dark web. Now, Varonis believes that security starts with the data. So knowing where the sensitive data lives, monitoring it for abuse, making sure only the right people have access, and efficiently then sustaining that secure state. We also need to be very aware of ways in which hackers can get hold of data that can potentially be used to compromise an account. So some of you may be aware, the most recent news I heard was the incident that caused 700 million users of LinkedIn's data to be for sale on the dark web. So just be wary, watch out for social engineering, spear phishing emails. And if one of your users becomes a victim of this, it's important to be able to have the visibility over how your possibly compromised accounts are behaving around data post-attack. So firstly, why is it important to classify data? When we understand what type of data we hold in our environment, we are much better placed to know what is sensitive and therefore what needs locking down and what doesn't. So we want to move towards a least privilege model and make sure that only the right people have access to the right data. And one of the first things that Varonis does is maps and classifies your data and is able to tell you whether it's sensitive or not. And it'll also tell you what type of data is held. So, it might be GDPR data, PCI, or maybe another form of PII. And not all of what we hold is going to be sensitive. So by classifying it, you're understanding where your priorities lie and what needs to be protected first. The Varonis data classification engine uses metadata and content matching based on patterns and dictionaries to identify files that are likely to contain keywords or phrases and patterns. So that's to say, using regular expressions. So that's what's of interest to your organization. What words might you be looking for? What phrases might you be looking for? So, for example, you might be interested in finding patient data, or you might be interested in finding national insurance numbers. So you can have regexes to set up to have a look at those. And the next step is understanding who has access to that data and how exposed it is across the organization. Many organizations have sensitive data that's open to everyone, but it's often very difficult to conclude as to what is configured with global open access. And this here is a really clear snapshot that Varonis provides to show a high-level understanding of the exact number of files and folders that contain sensitive data and that anyone in the organization can access. So in a little bit, when I show you a demonstration of the platform itself, we will have a look at some of these widgets and what information they're highlighting. So when data is overexposed like this, you face a couple of risks. The first is insider threats, so that data being taken out of the organization and used by employees. Or if an attacker manages to get in and compromise an account, that account will have access to all of the files and folders with global open access configuration. And that then means that the attacker can very easily be able to access sensitive data without even needing to try and escalate privileges. So these two widgets here are an example of the headlines that are provided on the dashboard. And using the ellipsis, or actually recently learned that it's called the meatball menu, in the corner of the widget, you're able to dive down into exactly which files and folders these are. And you're also able to see remediation graphs to plot over time how exposed your data is, so that you can see whether the problem's getting worse or whether it's getting better and where you need to continue to focus your efforts. And to make it really simple, sometimes you might see a widget and you think, okay, I get it, but I don't get why it's an issue, why it's a problem, and what problems it's going to cause down the line. But to make it really simple for you, there's also an explanation of what that widget is trying to tell you, and why this might be a cause for concern. So once we know what data is overexposed, we then have a very clear roadmap of what needs clearing up. And one worry organizations have when remediating access permissions is what will break if permissions are changed in the traditional way. So who will be calling up the help desk saying they've lost access to data they need to carry out their role, or what applications might break as a result of this? And another thing is for larger organizations is, do IT teams know who should have access to what data? Probably not. You're going to need to speak to the manager of each individual group for that. And do you know who the manager of each individual group is? Do you know who the owner of the data is? And all of this is extremely time consuming. And it's common knowledge that changing the permissions on a folder can take up to 6 hours if done in the traditional way. And now if you think about how long that'll take on all of your folders that have excessive open access, it's a lot. Varonis, what they actually found is that on average, 20% of an organization's files and folders and files are configured to have global open access when they really don't need to be. So Varonis is employing user behavior analytics to know exactly what users are doing with data. And with this intelligence, they can then understand who genuinely needs access to that data. And then furthermore, you can also pin down who the data owner is a lot more quickly, and can verify with them that those who you're putting into the new security group are the correct users. And then taking this another step forward, you're then able to automate this process. Now, once you've cleaned everything up and you think, great, that's fine, we can sit back, put our feet up, relax, and not worry about our data, you're wrong. We want to be able to sustain and maintain that environment. And you want to make sure that only the right people continue to have access to the right data. So what Varonis allows you to do is give that power to the data owners and the ability to carry out periodic entitlement reviews. So Varonis understands that organizations change and so do data access needs. So 1 month an individual may need to have access to a set of data for a particular project, but when that project ends, quite often that access is not taken away. And on the flip side, as well as data owners having the ability to review what users have access to their data, users can also request access to data that they don't currently have access to in the same portal that the data owners use for the entitlement reviews. They can then be able to see those requests and either confirm or deny the new access to their data. So now I want to take you through a very brief demonstration of the Varonis platform. So what I'll be looking at is firstly the dashboards to see how exposed my sensitive data is, and then I'll look to remediate this by only giving access to those who genuinely need access to the data. So hopefully you can all see this. What I'm looking at here is, a number of widgets that I talked about before and showed you a screenshot of. So we've got sensitive folders with open access. So 25% of our, folders, sensitive folders have open access, and files as well. And there are lots of other widgets here, and you can change the widgets that you have on the screen depending on your organization's priorities. So once we understand what's going on here, we can also dive down, as I said before, using the meatball menu. We can see across timeline, but we can also dive down and see exactly which files and folders have global open access. So here you can see exactly which folders have open access, and you can also see that Varonis has classified these and is showing exactly what type of data is held within these folders. So we want to be able to remediate access. So let's have a look. So this is the tree structure, the folder structure in our organization. So if we come down to see the legal folder, you can see that there's a very large number of counts of sensitive data, the types of sensitive data that's held within that folder. So if we double click on this, we're able to see on the right-hand side here that everyone has access to this data. And of course, this is no good. We don't want everyone having access to this data because we can see that there's a large number of sensitive information held in there. So what Varonis is going to allow us to do is remediate this, but in a sandbox environment. So we'll remove the permissions, but actually this is only in a sandbox environment. So we're not removing permissions straight away. We're being able to calculate the access errors. So who's going to be ringing up the service desk saying, help, I need access, my access is gone, what applications will be breaking in the meantime by us doing this. So we can really understand who genuinely needs access to this data. So we have a look across here, expected access errors, and we can see that these are all of the users who genuinely need access to this data in order to carry out their role. And I won't go into this now, but you can also find out from Varonis who the data owner is very quickly and easily. So you can say, ping them a message and say, these are the users that we believe should have access to the data. Can you confirm? And once we've done that, what we can do is edit the permissions and create a new group. So rather than everyone, so we use, a predefined group. Obviously, this is the legal folder. We want to add these individuals. Let's give them the right access permissions. and you'll see that this new group here has appeared. So those individuals are then still able to access the data. And once we're happy with that, then we can go ahead and commit those changes. And the great thing about the dashboard, so here when we were looking at the options, once you're in a process of remediating access and permissions and so on, what you'll be able to see is that over time, this is improving. So you're making remediation changes, and you can see that the number of folders, sensitive folders with open access, is really dropping off. But in, on the flip side, if it wasn't declining, and if it was increasing, then you can understand very quickly where you need to focus your remediation efforts. So that's a very quick overview of the platform itself. And now I want to talk to you a little bit about the data risk assessment. This is a free tool that Varonis and Somerford can provide that shows specifically where your weaknesses are and makes recommendations for remediation. So remediation of open access on sensitive folders is something that we just looked at, but there are also other areas that Varonis will recommend for remediation. And the report itself will highlight things such as where you have excessive open access, like we've just seen, as well as Active Directory vulnerabilities, such as accounts with passwords that don't expire. And then all of this is coupled with statistics so that you can gauge the severity of the risk within your environment. And depending on where you feel you're most at risk or what your priority remediations are, depends on the type of risk assessment you can choose to have. And they range from, you can see here, ransomware preparedness to cloud readiness, or quite topical, remote work risk assessment. Now, this assessment, as I mentioned, is entirely free. All it takes is 90 minutes of your time. And as well as having access to the data security platform itself, you'll also have access to the incident response team, which is made up of security experts who will work with you to recognize an attack and then look to remediate it. And it's that containment of the attack, or even the eradication of it, and being able to support you in making suggestions to work against it, as well as moving forward, that's really going to highlight, how you can move from the current state you're in into a more secure state, a more secure posture. It's also worth noting that as well as carrying out the data risk assessment, layering this with a purple team exercise is going to really show where those gaps lie. And for those of you who aren't aware, purple teaming combines the focused penetration testing of red teaming, pen testing, with training and education for the blue team. So that's the defense led by cybersecurity teams to improve incident response procedures. So in other words, it's testing your ability to cope with an ethical hack that simulates a real world attack and coaches you on how to improve. So the link included at the bottom of this slide will allow you to register for a data risk assessment, but please also feel free to drop us an email, which our email address is marketing@somerfordassociates.com, and we will be more than happy to look into that for you. So no questions have come through at this point, but if you think of any questions after today, or you're rewatching the session back and you come up with questions, or colleagues have any questions, then please do get in touch. We'd be more than happy to help you. And of course, we would love for you to take advantage of the free data risk assessment. Please do keep in touch. Thank you all for joining me today. I really hope that was useful. I hope to see you soon.